Dr. William Reeves. He is a retired emergency medicine physician, longtime activist around issues of foreign policy, economic justice, and human rights. Traveled to Cuba with me and Code Pink back in February. William or Barry, what would you prefer I call you?
I prefer Barry.
Hey, Barry. You are like just very wired into what's going on in Honduras. Can you tell us about that?
I've traveled to Honduras 3 times since 2016, and I guess what I would say is, I think in order to understand Honduras, the most important thing is to understand the role of U.S. foreign policy. So just a brief background, in 2009, a progressive president of Honduras, Mel Zelaya, was deposed in a military coup. And that was during Obama's administration, and that coup was basically endorsed or rubber stamped by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. From 2009 on, the government emphasized policies of neoliberalism, privatization of enterprises,
austerity
measures, and those changes provoked much of the pressure on immigration. That is to say, the conditions in the country deteriorated and have deteriorated ever since the coup in 2009. In 2016, I visited Honduras the first time, and that was after the assassination of a woman named Berta Cáceres. So she was an internationally famous environmentalist, and her assassination, I think it really shocked the country, even though they're accustomed to political violence. Her assassination could probably be compared to the assassination, say, of Martin Luther King here. I think the country was stunned that someone of her renown would be assassinated. Fast forward to the presidential election of 2017, last November, a coalition party in opposition to the regime was clearly ahead in the elections. Most observers understand that the liberal candidate would have won the election by at least 5 percentage points. However, during the course of the election, there were computer glitches that occurred multiple times, and once the computers came back online, somehow the conservative candidate had won the election. So that was in November of 2017, and what happened from that point on were mass protests that occurred throughout the country. And this was followed by declarations of martial law, curfews. The military arrested, I think, 1,300 people. 30 people were killed in the streets. And my most recent visits then had been in April and May of this year to support primarily political prisoners who have been incarcerated in the post-election protests that have gone on. So I think it's important when people think about immigration and refugees that we realize the impact of our foreign policy. Refugees come to this country for many reasons: economic opportunity, fleeing crime, but our foreign policy plays a huge role, and I think that's not always part of the discussion or understanding.
Has there been I recall Iran-Contra in the 80s. Has there been a parallel screw-up on our part or misplaced loyalties or whatever you want to call it in Guatemala and El Salvador, the other two countries that seem to be sending us large numbers of refugees?
Well, I think, the short answer is yes. I think that, one of the most interesting speakers that we interviewed on one of my trips was a man named Gerardo Torres Zelaya. He's a member of the Libre Party in Honduras, and he had observations that went like this, that everyone in Honduras now understands that the U.S. State Department decides who their president will be. And they also understand that they're currently living under a dictatorship. The U.S. was the first country to certify or accept the election results of the election in November that was clearly fraudulent. So I think when one attempts to understand this, I think in the broadest sense, you would have to think about it as sort of the battle between capitalism and, say, neoliberalism and capitalism's most extreme form, a battle between that ideology and socialism. That is to say, a system of economics that somehow attempts to look after its own people.
Yeah, that's sort of democratic socialism in the current parlance, not Soviet socialism.
Correct. And so that's how that battle is played out. And I think that, to the extent that these countries head toward a democratic socialism, they get pushback, and that's primarily from the U.S. That's my opinion. That's the opinion of the opinion of Hondurans on the ground too,
right,
who are on the front lines of these battles.
Is there hope for a solution in Honduras, or is it going to have to come out of the United States? And what can people who are listening to this program right now do about this? What can Americans do to help solve this problem that the United States appears to have, if not created, certainly exacerbated?
Right. Well, there are things that can be done. There's a bill in the House right now. I'll pull it up. I put it down as a link. The Berta Cáceres Human Rights in Honduras Act is House Bill number 1299. And that's a bill that would withhold funding for the Honduran military and police until certain human rights measures were undertaken. So, that's a concrete thing. That's languished in the House, for a year and a half or so. And to get back to your question, I think the Hondurans, and I particularly noticed this with my last visit in May, I think they're somewhat stunned. I think the blatantness of the electoral fraud has stunned them a bit, and they're trying to regroup and trying to figure out a strategy to move forward. So ever since the 2009 coup, they have taken every means through civil society, through organizing, in an attempt through the democratic process to effect change, and they had that change stolen from them in November. So I think in some ways, it's similar to the way many of us felt when Trump was elected, that there was a period of time when we were all just shocked and we weren't really sure how to move forward. And I think Honduras is in that state at this time.
Yeah. Remarkable. We're talking with Dr. Barry Reeves, a retired emergency room physician, longtime activist. We traveled together to Cuba. Barry, we talked a little bit, on the bus and whatnot in Cuba about the state of medicine in Cuba. But I'm curious, as a physician, Cuba is kind of internationally famous for being the only country in the world whose major export is doctors. What was your sense of what the state of the Cuban medical circumstance is, and what can we learn from that for the better or worse?
Well, on our trip, we weren't really exposed to any Cuban medical facilities, and so I didn't really get any firsthand experience. The fact that all people have health care, including dental care, is just stunning to me.
And vision. Yeah. Yeah, everybody, literally the street beggars, and there were a few of them, not very many, but there were a few, had perfect teeth.
I know.
The homeless people, the local schizophrenic,
I know, Tom, I noticed the same thing, and it's just stunning. So, you come away wondering, how is it that a country with so few resources can at least do this for their people when, here in our country, the homeless population is increasing, and, healthcare is a nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a remarkable experience, and Barry, I'm glad that we could have got together and met on this. And keep us up to date on what's going on Honduras. The door's always open here for you on the program. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Barry Reeves, a friend, a physician, good guy, traveled with us to Cuba with Code Pink, doing some really great work down there. Thank you, Barry. We'll be back.